sometime in 1964. I honestly couldn't tell you when it was for sure, but first year of the fair, my mother's Uncle Miles died, and his funeral was held just up the street here in Queens. And my dad, being a very pragmatic fellow, said, well, hey, we'll be parked in the neighborhood anyway, why don't we go to the fair? Because the fair was just down the street. We came down Booth Memorial Avenue, crossed the busy street, and came here. This was a parking lot at the time. Walked across the parking lot here. It was packed, of course. I was glad we parked on the street. I will never forget walking under this overpass. I was so excited. The fair was just 100 feet or so ahead of me. And I'd been waiting for this for years. My dad paid the admission price. I think it was probably $1 for adults, 50 cents for kids, something like that. And right down here, in this spot, was the Bell System exhibit. It was the most amazing thing I had ever seen in my life, and it was just the beginning.
Before it was all over, we'd ridden on a Chrysler assembly line, taken a Ford Mustang convertible through the age of dinosaurs, and seen a future with General Motors. We'd had a Kodak moment on a rooftop moonscape, walked with Sinclair dinosaurs, and visited both the Vatican and the Mormon Temple. And most importantly, for me anyway, we'd gotten a tantalizing glimpse of the world of Disney. For 9-year-old Billy Newcott, the New York World's Fair was the first inkling of the big, amazing world that was out there just waiting for him. It was all here, including the world itself, the Unisphere, the world's largest freestanding globe. And it's there still, at Flushing Meadows Corona Park, the old fairgrounds, where you can find a surprising number of World's Fair remnants, just as intriguing as they were more than a half-century ago. The New York State Pavilion was built to stay after the fair. The only problem was no one knew what they wanted to do with it. For a while it was a roller skating rink, but mostly it just fell into rusted disrepair. Every time I've come back to the fairgrounds, the building that was once called the Tent of Tomorrow seemed one day closer to demolition. Until my last visit, when flashes of the original Velveeta cheese yellow paint were beginning to show up. It was a small first step towards reclaiming the building where my brother Martin and I rode on little cars back in 1964. The next big step would be in restoring the gigantic map of New York State, now protected by a layer of weed-choked sand underneath. During the fair, New Yorkers trudged all over that map, looking for their hometowns. Even the most ardent fans of the pavilion acknowledge that the old observation towers may be beyond saving. If they do come down, the only reminders of them will be these stylized discs atop the Queen's Theater.
Where I'm standing now is just about where the Pietà was during the World's Fair. This is the little sliver of land that the Vatican Pavilion was on. And it doesn't look like it would fit now, but I guess it did.
Sunken deep into the ground are 2 time capsules, one of them from each of the 20th century New York World's Fairs, to be opened in 5,000 years. Until then, the site seems to be a magnet for homeless people.
50 years ago, my dad stood at just about this spot and took a picture of this behind me. This was a giant fountain. Now he's a fountain gone. It's now a skate park. They kept the circle of it, surrounded by big trees. That's the U.S. Tennis Center going up behind me. They're putting a dome over it now, or a roof. If you use your imagination, it kind of looks like the old GE exhibit.
In the shadow of the Unisphere stands the old New York City Pavilion, built for the 1939 World's Fair. For those who think terrorism is a new curse on the country, outside there's a small memorial to 2 New York cops who were killed when a time bomb went off here on July 4th during that 1939 fair. Inside is the Queens Museum of Art, with an acclaimed program of changing art exhibits and a whole gallery dedicated to the 2 New York World's Fairs. But the real attraction is the panorama of the city of New York, created for the 1964 fair. Every single building in the city was represented in the sprawling model, right down to the Little Red Lighthouse under the George Washington Bridge, and it's been updated several times since then. Look closely and you'll see the new Citi Field and the new Yankee Stadium, but even after 15 years, the museum was still reluctant to take down the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center.
I was kind of lucky in that my World's Fair experience extended past the fair. About 3 or 4 years after the fair was over, my dad took us out here on a Sunday afternoon. And we came here and we saw this panorama of New York, which at the time still had intact the helicopter ride around it. You would ride in a little car and Lowell Thomas would tell you what you were seeing. So it was fun. I had like an extra bonus trip to the World's Fair because those are exhibits that we did not see when we were here the first time, when the fair was still in business.
During the World's Fair, the Hall of Science was a standalone building housing exhibits about various fields of science. Now it's the central structure of the New York Hall of Science. From the outside, the tall structure resembles a concrete scroll being unrolled, an interesting but not especially beautiful building. Inside, though, the museum's Great Hall is bathed in soft blue light as sunlight pours through 5,400 small stained glass windows. The undulating walls, towering 100 feet up, provide a sense somewhere between floating in space and sitting in a great European cathedral. It is, quite simply, one of the most beautiful rooms in the city, if not the world. Downstairs, the Hall of Science has lots of hands-on exhibits, including Mathematica, an exhibit that was a centerpiece of the IBM exhibit at the 1964 World's Fair. The typefaces and the design are distinctively 1960s, but that only enhances the exhibit's appeal.
I hesitate to even mention it because, just because something is old doesn't mean it's bad. And it's fun to see this here still after all these years. And math never changes.
Outside the Hall of Science, the old U.S. Space Park, which during the fair included a full-scale lunar lander, still features actual Mercury and Gemini launch vehicles, now surrounded by a space-themed mini-golf course. The old World's Fair heliport still stands with a restaurant up top, overlooking the Queen's Zoo, which includes a geodesic dome aviary that was originally the fair's official event structure, called the World's Fair Pavilion. For those of us who were at the fair, it's fun and a little bittersweet to pick out the locations of old favorite pavilions. The Ford exhibit used to tower over this bit of highway, and GM's Futurama was right here on these ball fields. The dramatic United States Pavilion was still standing when I visited the park with my family in 1967, but it was eventually demolished. Today the U.S. Tennis Center stands there, built on the pilings of the old U.S. Pavilion. Around the park you'll spot lots of sculptures from the fair. Most look like they should date from 1939, but they're really from the '64 fair, reflecting the old-timey taste of the fair's director, Robert Moses. And talk about old-timey. Among some trees you can still find the 30-foot-tall column of Jerash, left over from the Jordanian Pavilion. If you're like most people, you'll come to the old fairgrounds the same way most New Yorkers did back in the day, on the 7 train from Manhattan. You'll get off on a platform designed to accommodate tens of thousands of passengers at a time, walk across the train yard below, and head down a boardwalk that's been welcoming visitors for nearly 80 years.
The last thing my family did at the World's Fair one fall night in 1965, right about here, just at this spot, there was a little pavilion right here where you could ring the Liberty Bell, replica of the Liberty Bell. And I remember the dull, dead thud of a gong it made because of the crack. And as I left that night, I had the same kind of dull gong feeling in my heart because I knew, even at 10 years old or 11 years old, that I would never have an experience like that again. And I haven't, but it's nice to remember.